Some people have been messaging me about David Sinclair's recent tweet. We actually talked about this on the After Hours podcast. So I guess we briefly discussed rosuvastatin and atorvastatin. We discussed how some people, even though they're both generics and they've both been statins for a long time, one's lipophilic, one's hydrophilic. Sometimes they're called lipophilic and non-lipophilic. But some people have been messaging me about David Sinclair's recent tweet. We actually talked about this on the After Hours podcast of all podcasts. We try to do entertainment, but we went into this. So we'll link that either above or in the description for people that are curious. But as a non-clinician, non-scientist, for people that are listening to this, how do you read a tweet like that? I think it's somewhat alarmist. Specifically calling out something like rosuvastatin as being more concerning for dementia or whatnot. How do you interpret that?
So I interpret that as it is, a single study that is showing one result, and there are limitations and biases to every single study. And so it needs to be taken with a grain of salt and compared to the majority of evidence that exists out there. That study specifically was really interesting that was the conclusion that he came to, because it actually mentioned 3 different studies, and in 2 of the studies there was no difference, and then he chose to discuss the one study that there was a difference. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, I think it was a 3-part tweet, and the 2 subtweets were unrelated to that study, and they were meta-analyses that looked at the overall, all the studies that are looking at this, and develop and weight those based on how good the evidence is and how much bias there is, and then comes up with a single point to look at the statistical significance of that. And those studies compared all statins with dementia risk and Alzheimer's risk. Yeah. So that is how I interpret a study. I would look at that one study, but then the next step I would go is I would search for meta-analyses. If not that, I would look at systematic reviews. If not that, I look at pooled analysis. And so all 3 of those things are looking at the majority of the studies out there that exists, and the general direction of where it's pointing. And we oftentimes update the medical literature. We think one thing and we learn something new, and it changes our mind. Mm-hmm. But usually where the direction that the majority of studies are pointing, that does not flip back and forth. Mm-hmm. So the majority of the studies are showing that the statins decrease the risk of Alzheimer's and general dementia. And so that's kind of where I would lay the most of my confidence.
Yeah. Another thing to think about is observer bias. So if you're looking at the lifetime incidence of something like neurodegenerative disease, and some studies do account for these confounding variables, at least to the best of their ability. But if in the case of something like a metformin or a statin or even a GLP-1, let's say it's a diabetic patient, and let's say if they didn't start one of these medications, again, back to that all-cause mortality, maybe they would live 1 year longer, an average of 80 years to 81 years. So the incidence of neurodegenerative disease in those individuals between age 80 and 81, you would find that in one group, but not in the other group.